Melanie. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brittany. Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you. I can't quite recall the time we met, but it was an event and someone was like, Britt, you have to know Melanie. And then I looked into what you're doing and I was like, you are right. I do have to know her.
Yeah, I think we met a few months ago at another event, and I have to say the feeling was mutual, Brittany. I was like, I must have this woman in my life. So I'm glad we could do this together.
Yes, definitely. Well, we always love to kick off our podcast with learning more about our guests. We want to know your background, where are you from, what did you study, and how did you end up here?
Yeah, cool. So I currently live in New York, but I actually grew up on the West Coast out in Beaverton, Oregon, which many people may know as the place that Nike is headquartered. But what many people may not know is that there's a lot of tech companies and semiconductors out there, companies out there as well. So I grew up down the street from the Intel headquarters and a bunch of other really cool, disruptive, innovative companies. And I think it was very early on that I started to get really interested in technology. My dad actually fueled that interest because he was a tech geek and started his own company. He learned how to program and created this point of sale program for small businesses. And that's what he did to make a living. And so I think from a very early age, I had this sort of natural comfort with an interest in technology. And of course, I didn't know that as a kid. But as I got older and decided to, really think about which direction I want to take my career in, I found that interest kind of bubbling back up. And I said, hey, you know what? I definitely want to go into something where really interesting entrepreneurs are using technology to improve people's lives. And that was really as simple as that. And so after I left college, I did go into investment banking, which was a great foundational, learning environment. I met a ton of really interesting people, got to cover really interesting companies, all in technology and media. And then I found out, about myself that I really wanted to go to the company side and help to build and scale something. So I left banking and went to a digital health company called Everyday Health, which was at the time I joined a small startup, about 50 people. And the whole premise was to use the power of the internet and data to bring consumers, patients, or caretakers the right health and wellness information, but also be able to have a platform to connect them to the right healthcare professionals. Mm-hmm. And, it got, the company got bigger and more sophisticated, but there I really realized that I had this passion also for healthcare and, how can we use technology to improve the lives of patients or caretakers, because it's so, personal to me, personal, I think, to everyone. And so from there, I actually spent about 9 years at that company, which was a long time, particularly in the world of startups.
But 9 years, oh my God.
Yeah. And it was fantastic because every year was different and challenging. And we eventually grew the company into a 750 person company. Wow. We did an IPO, so we were public for a couple of years. And then we ended up selling it opportunistically to a really fantastic strategic buyer. And then that's the point at which I left, and I said, hey, I want to just sort of see what else there is to do in the world, and continuing to hone in on this thesis of disruptive technologies, and finding a company with a mission that I could really get behind. And so I took a little bit of a detour, more into diversified media, and I was the CFO at Refinery 29 for about 3 years. And you probably know the company. But, it was a brand that I had really loved, and I consumed all the content even before I ever thought of, working there. And I think that, again, using the power of technology, content, distribution channels, and, using digital technologies to bring in real life events and content to anyone, really, all around this mission of elevating underrepresented voices was something that I thought was super cool. So I went there for a few years, and then helped to eventually merge that company as well. And then I came to another crossroads, and I just said, hey, now's another inflection point and a great opportunity to think about what I want to do. And I really wanted to get back into healthcare. I really wanted to go back into a growth environment, as you know, Brittany, high growth, fast paced, environments with white space. I mean, it's, a little daunting, but it's also a lot of fun. And so I eventually found my way to where I am now, which is Tomorrow Life Sciences. And I'm having a blast here.
Amazing. Before we get into what Tomorrow Life Sciences is, a quick question about your background with this investment banking and then digital health and then media. Something we see in Femtech is that I call it the Femtech trifecta. So really successful women's health and wellness companies, they have a great product, they have a community that they're building of their users, and then they have education. And now this is a lot to ask for from startups and from founders. Like, you should probably most tech companies only have to worry about their product. But in Femtech, you need to also usually educate women on like, hey, that symptom is actually menopause, or this is normal, or you're not the only one. And then also there's that community factor, because even if you tell them the rates of how common this is, a lot of women want to be in these community groups where they can talk with other women experiencing the same things. And so you have like this really perfect background for building a trifecta. So have you seen that in the women's health and wellness space, like that there's like this like media, events, community component, education along with the product?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the kind words. I absolutely agree with you. I think that having a great product or service is a bit, like table stakes, right? You have to have that. But what you said about community and education, it's so important. I'll just take those separately. I think a lot of the topics that are addressed in Femtech or women's health, and especially as it relates to what I'm doing at Tomorrow, which is around fertility and reproductive health. I mean, some of these topics were taboo topics for a long time. And I have a ton of friends who have had their own fertility stories and, challenges. And I think maybe even 5 years ago, even my friends were sort of ashamed to say like, oh, I had a miscarriage, or I don't think I can have a baby, because, it was almost like something was wrong with their bodies and they didn't want to talk about it. And I think the sort of acceptance around that was still low, I think, in our society. And so, I think that's one thing that we've shown a lot of progress in. And I'm really proud to say that, like, gosh, now not a week goes by without something around femtech or reproductive health, fertility, or women's health. And so I'm really happy about that. But there still is this education piece around, what does this really mean? What's the data around it? What's the studies that show X, Y, Z? And how can we provide those tools and resources to women as they're, thinking about these topics or going through these issues themselves? And then on the community piece, I think it's so true. I mean, particularly when it comes to women, I think, when you're going through one of these health moments, you're actively looking for information, you're reading all the books you can, you're talking to the doctors, you're talking to the right people. But there's this level of trust that I think women have when they speak to another woman going through the same thing or having gone through that, same situation. And it almost means as much, if not more, from what the experts have to say.
Yep.
So I do see that. And I think, the power of that community and the power of, quite frankly, using technology to bring those communities together is really powerful.
Yeah, especially if the other women in the community look like them, right? So I know,
Yes.
especially in the Black community, there's this historical distrust in the healthcare system for pretty good reasons. And, so when you have one Black woman talking to another one about her fibroids and how common those are, uterine fibroids in the Black women's community, and treatments available, like when you can get a referral from another woman that looks like you're more likely to be inclined if they trust that company, I can trust that company,
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Well, let's get into Tomorrow Life Sciences. Tell us, what is that?
So Tomorrow Life Sciences is a fertility tech company. It started about 3 years ago by 3 founders who have been sort of serial entrepreneurs in New York with non-fertility backgrounds, actually. They were from marketing and advertising, data sciences, a hospitality venture at one point. And they, it's interesting, they had a conversation with a woman who they used to work with. And, it's just a general catch up, and they were, asking her how she was doing. And at the end of the meeting, she said to them, guys, I just want you to know that I got my eggs frozen, and I'm really, really happy about that. And, this was a very smart, intelligent, sophisticated New Yorker, executive woman. And they started asking her a bunch of questions about it. And she had the answers, right then and there. She knew everything. And then they asked her, well, do you know how your eggs are being stored? Like, how are they being cared for? And it was the one question that she got stumped. And she was like, I actually don't know that. Yeah. And so, out of sheer curiosity, the founders started looking into this. And what they realized was that fertility clinics around the world are currently using manual, outdated processes to store the frozen eggs and embryos that will eventually be at the heart of every IVF birth. So, complete lack of technology. We're talking about steel tanks, handwritten labels with Sharpie markers used to write patients' names to identify the vials. You're laughing, right? Because you can see the risk in that. These tanks have to be topped off manually by staff in the clinics every day, every week. They have to go and basically look with their eye and say, oh, the liquid nitrogen level is a little low. Well, you should fill that back up. And then these are just stored in the clinics themselves, and they take up a lot of space. Some of them are in closets, under desks, really just stored wherever they have space. And then in terms of monitoring, there is no technology to monitor these tanks. So again, it's all physical. It's very manual. It's very analog. It's very outdated. And I think what's interesting, and that many people may not know, is that IVF was first developed in the barnyard with animal husbandry. So literally for cattle breeding and horse breeding. And this is the storage method that was used back then, which was only about 50 years ago, actually. So, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that long ago. But then when IVF was being done in humans, this was the storage, quote unquote, system that moved, into the IVF clinics. And so that's how they've been doing it. So when the founders heard about this, they said, oh my gosh, this is a problem, because why can't we leverage technology and the power of the ability to be able to monitor these things remotely, to have sensors on these tanks, to have real unique identifiers with RFID chips instead of Avery labels with the handwritten names on them. And there's just a dramatic risk reduction when you're thinking about moving from a manual process to an automated one. And so, I think that what we're doing is very sophisticated, and our technology solution is sophisticated, but the problem that we're trying to solve is not rocket science, right? It's a no-brainer of how do we just, help these clinics around the world adopt this new technology, and quite frankly, just give them the peace of mind, both to the clinicians and the patients alike, the peace of mind that their eggs and embryos are safe and, cared for properly until, they're ready to be used.
Because do women have to pay an annual fee or something for the storage long term?
Yes. So, yeah, they're already paying for it. Yeah. So, the clinics will charge for the actual procedure, but then there's an annual storage fee that has to be paid. And so, and I just don't, back to your education point, I just don't think that people know necessarily to ask about this piece, right? Mm-hmm. I think, at least just speaking anecdotally from the friends that I've had that gone through IVF, they go in there with their list of questions about the procedure. How much does this cost? What drugs do I have to take? How does the procedure actually work? Who are you, doctor? I've looked up your reputation in your lab. And they just don't know that they should ask about the storage and what happens after, right? What happens after? And are you, where are they? And are they being looked after? And I'll tell you, when I first started talking to Tamara about coming here, I talked to one of my best friends from college who had gone through a number of rounds of IVF, and thankfully she has two beautiful boys now, both products of IVF. But I was telling her about this problem and kind of why I was interested in this company and why I was interested in making a difference. And she just was quiet, and she looked at me and she goes, God, I still have embryos left, and I don't know if I'm done, with my family building. I don't know. But I did not know about this. And she was really horrified. And she said, now I know I should ask about this. And so it's not about saying that the clinics have been doing anything wrong. I mean, they've been using what they have had, right? They've been doing what they've been doing with what they've had. And they've done tremendous work in terms of work that, embryologists are heroes, right? I mean, they're doing incredible work that no one else really can. So it's not that, but now there's an alternative. And so how can we just help, and bring them along into a safer environment?
100%. So I just want to paint a picture for some of our listeners. So I can imagine exactly what you're describing because I am a PhD in genetics. I've worked in cancer cell labs, E. coli labs, and so I know exactly what you're talking about because I would have the tank. You have to make sure the liquid nitrogen's filled in it. You open it up, the smoke comes out. So listeners, if you think about like Jurassic Park or something and the smoke and the music,
Yeah.
that's what happens. And you have to wear these big gloves, otherwise you'll burn yourself. And you'll pull out this like container that has lots of little samples in there. And yeah, we just wrote on the side of them with Sharpie marker. Like that was, and there's actually a joke in like graduate students that like if you're taking over somebody's project who just graduated, but if they were like Chinese, there's a risk that their labels are in Chinese, and so like, so there's like when you have it, when it's not barcodes and it's handwriting, there's a running of the risk of somebody, you have ethanol on your hand and you wipe it off and it's gone and you'll never know what that tube was again, right? And also the whole freeze thaw issue. Do you because I think our listeners may have heard about this freeze thaw issue in terms of the vaccine, like, oh, once the the COVID-19 vaccine is thawed out, they they're looking for arms to put it in. Well, is that the same for eggs? Like you can't freeze thaw them, right? It would not be good for the eggs.
Yeah, that's right. So first of all, I think it's great, but it's kind of funny how cold chain management has become a sexy topic, recently. but it really is complex, and it does. It can destabilize, the vaccine and other things. But as it relates to eggs and embryos, I mean, particularly embryos, they are as delicate, if not more delicate than a snowflake, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever seen a snowflake land on your arm, but it melts immediately. It's gone. And it's very similar. And so you cannot have these specimens outside of cryogenic temperatures unless you're going through a thaw process and actually transferring the embryo into the individual. But what's damaging or potentially damaging, I guess, is that when you're pulling those specimens out of the dewar, which is the name for the steel tank, and you're looking around for, Melanie's specimen, and it takes you a couple minutes, and these embryologists are very skilled, they're very fast, but still, ambient temperatures are going into the tank, and meanwhile, there's the smoke, the Jurassic Park smoke coming out that's, fogging your vision, and you're looking for the right one, and so it does take time, and so it's hard to know whether that is actually damaging or not to the specimen.
Yeah.
And so, I think that the care and that needs to be taken for these specimens, the most precious and certainly the most emotional cells. Yes. There is a sort of no fail situation here. And everyone at Tomorrow takes this very seriously, and as the clinicians and the clinics do as well, right? Because they're so delicate and so fragile. And when you think about like the freeze thawing issue, when you think about the embryo or the egg, what happens is, it starts to develop ice crystals, which are sharp, which can hurt the cell. So that's kind of just a simple way to think about that. But, with Tomorrow, with the technology, with the unique identification, we have, robotics that work with our software that basically says like, no, we want Melanie's specimen. She's here today for her, transfer. The machine will pick the right one. It'll check with the unique identification code to make sure that it's mine and not anybody else's. It'll take that one out and save temperatures, and it will never leave that sort of cryogenic safe environment.
Yeah. So paint the picture for me. I'm imagining me in my lab. I'll have to find a picture. I have pictures of me, listeners. I'll post it on social of me and my nitrogen tanks and stuff, but with these giant orange gloves that were clunky and blah, blah, blah. But like paint the picture for us. What does the Tomorrow system look like? Is it a giant robot? Like, does it have a name? Is it a box? What does it look like?
Yeah, so it's pretty big. It is a robot, and funny story though, when I first joined this company, I have a son, a little guy, he's 4 years old. And when I told him I was joining this company and I brought him to the office, this was pre-COVID, and I showed him the robot and he goes, "Mommy, robots," you know, it was pretty awesome. But yeah, it's a big, it's a hardware and software combination. So there's a big freezer tank. And if you've worked in healthcare, as Brittany, I'm sure you know these, but the really large freezer tanks that are used in other, tissue banks and biorepositories around the world. So we have that. Then we have a robotic arm that sits on top that will, goes up and down and goes into the tank to find the correct specimen. And then we have a user, a screen that's a touch screen for the user to interact with our software, and the software controls the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, if you can picture in a clinic, this sits in the clinic, this essentially removes about 25 of those steel tanks. Which is great. The clinic can get that space back, and all of those specimens can go into the Tomorrow platform. And the embryologist will, walk right up to the screen, follow our super easy to use user interface, and it just says such and such patient is here today. And then the automatic, robotics will go in and pull the right specimen out. We'll double check it, and then they're ready to go. And then the other piece, which is so compelling, is the constant 24/7 remote monitoring of the environment. And so we're using a lot of data to do predictive analytics. That if we see that someone's robot, for example, perhaps the environment is getting warmer, and we can see that the temperature is degrading by a fraction of a degree, right? Our team can actually flag that and say, hey, let's fix this, or let's notify the clinic before something goes wrong. And I think, unfortunately, there have been instances, real life instances of things going wrong in these clinics. So in 2018, there were 2 clinics, one in San Francisco, one in Cleveland, that coincidentally within, I think, a week of each other had disasters that unfortunately led to the loss of thousands and thousands of eggs and embryos. So, I think that technology and automation should really reduce the risk of those events happening. And then just, another instance that is a real thing that happens is the wrong embryo being transferred into the wrong person.
How often does that happen?
I've only heard this anecdotally happen, but it has happened. And I actually know somebody in my own community that it's happened to. So it can be devastating. It's devastating, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were talking about those natural disasters, I was actually going to ask you about that. And please tell me, like, the old tech and then versus your robot, like, is it dependent upon electricity? Because I know that my PhD program at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, we have hurricanes, so we have generator upon generator. But they, at one point they kept all the, mice in the basement, and they flooded in Hurricane Harvey, and everyone lost their experiments and blah, blah, blah. And so what's the electricity dependence on the old tech and versus your robot?
Yeah, so the old tech really was not dependent on electricity, but it was very vulnerable to any sort of, natural disaster, because these tanks, again, they were manually kept up and maintained. A lot of the records are in 3-ring binders or spreadsheets.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. I mean, it's funny, Brittany, because in a lot of other parts of healthcare too, not just in this world that Tomorrow is playing in, but I still go to my, primary care physician, and there's still folders, behind the receptionist desk. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Why is it still in a folder on a piece of paper? So, I think we have a lot to improve upon there in general. But yeah, so the old tech was really, manual, paper records, very little redundancy or backup, certainly not reliant on cloud-based technology or any sort of tech monitoring. Actually, when we all were locked down for COVID, a lot of our fertility clinic partners struggled with, how do I get in there? How do I maintain the environment in these tanks? How do I even check up on them? Because, we're locked down. And, everybody managed to get through it, but in some ways, people looked at the new technology that Tomorrow's offering in a way as a disaster recovery solution, because our solution does not require that physical labor to be present to upkeep the environment. So our system in any sort of natural disaster can live without electricity for up to 2 weeks. So that's great. And then, of course, we have the remote monitoring that's all cloud-based, that, you know, we can see something before it happens, hopefully, in terms of the overall environment itself. So it really is, you know, a preventative measure, I think, to move to this new tech.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds so high tech, like such a jump from the evolution. Is it going to affect the prices for women who want to store their eggs or embryos?
You know, each fertility clinic is different in terms of how they currently work with their patients. And so, you know, depending on the clinic, depending on the geography, the prices can range. But what we know is, you know, Tomorrow contracts with the fertility clinic itself. And we say, look, you know, we'll help you to adopt this and implement this. And we could even work with you to communicate with your patients about why this is compelling and interesting and why they should care about this. But really, the relationship there is between the clinic and the patient. So in some instances, you know, fertility clinics may revisit their pricing, but we don't really do that at Tomorrow. But I will say that just from a consumer standpoint, I think if I were given a choice, you know, pay X dollars more for technology-based solution versus the outdated old tech, I think I would do it. I think that there's some elasticity there, you know, in terms of what people are willing to pay for. And I don't know how much that is. And certainly we're thinking about doing some consumer insights around that to just understand that better. But I do think that conceptually, if you ask a woman who has just undergone this, you know, quite expensive procedure, quite emotional procedure, or is even thinking about doing this, right, that she's probably going to want to ask herself, like, which solution would I have, and is it worth it to me? And the answer probably is yes.
Yeah. I am someone who, I am not a brands lady. Like, I'm never going to buy an expensive purse. Like, I'm gonna buy my purse at Target, y'all. Okay. Like, I don't need name brand anything, but like in this scenario, hell yeah. You know, especially somebody who's worked with the liquid nitrogen in the cells, and I know technicians, and I'm like, oh no, I would much rather have a robot touching this than anything else. Human error.
Well, it's like, you know, what is the dollar amount, or what's the value that you would put on peace of mind?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I think it's really important.
How many clinics are using Tomorrow?
So we just commercially launched in January. So we've spent, like I said, 3 years developing, testing, working with embryologists. Actually, we had a number of the leading U.S. fertility clinics who partnered with us earlier on, and we had their embryologists and lab directors in, and they actually gave us guidance on the product itself. So that was all really great, and we incorporated all that feedback. So it really is a system, I think, for embryologists that was built with the feedback from embryologists, right, which I think is really cool. But we just launched. So right now we're in 3 fertility clinics in the US. We're going to be quickly expanding and onboarding additional clinics. By the end of the year, we should have over 30 clinic sites on the Tomorrow technology, which will be really exciting. And we're also looking to expand internationally, first into the UK and other parts of Western Europe, likely next year. But I don't know if you know this stat, Brittany, but only 9% of IVF activity happens in the US.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, when I don't know if it's, I was shocked when I found that out. Only 9%. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons for it. You know, economically, you know, it's been, first of all, it's been carved out in the U.S. as an elective procedure for many years. And so that's part of it. And so it's, you know, heavy cash transaction, which can be economically divisive. But, you know, you have other parts of the world like the UK and Europe combined are about 27% of IVF volume. So 3 times the size of the US. Yeah. Other countries like, you know, within Europe, Spain is has a lot of activity, Israel, you know, Japan, 20% of the market. China is huge, not surprisingly, about 37%, I think it is. So, and all of the clinics everywhere around the world, Brittany, are the same. They're on this old tech.
Wow.
So I think that there's an opportunity to really bring this like safety, security, and reliability to clinicians and patients everywhere. So that's part of our strategy going forward is, how quickly can we scale to just help as many people as we can?
That's really interesting because listeners, if you don't know this, most tech companies like want to come to the US because our market is so big, right? I talk to founders every single day that are in Berlin or London or Paris or wherever. And they're like, we have an idea, we're going to come to the US and fundraise and launch. And I'm always like, what about Germany though? What about, and we talk about strategy and what's the right choice for them. But that's the argument is always that the US is the biggest market, right? And so that's so interesting that IVF is actually like US in comparison.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. What are some of the future goals for tomorrow?
Well, I certainly think it's that international expansion and, again, helping to just bring this technology to serve patients everywhere, or anybody thinking about this. I do think that there are some really interesting adjacencies that the company could go into, just transferring our technology, right? Because essentially what it is a lot of expertise around specimen management. We have the embryologists on staff. We have cryotechnicians on staff. We have, cryobiologists, people who've run major biorepositories in our team. So I do think there's an opportunity to potentially look at other areas where we could be helpful. Just to think of a couple of things, cord blood is an interesting one.
Yeah. What are they storing cord blood? And this is when listeners, you have a baby, you can pay for them to save like I don't know if they save just the cord or the whole placenta. I'm not sure, but it's something about saving something so that maybe your baby in the future could use the stem cells from it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, they have similar management challenges there. And there's, so I think we can just do it. I think we can just sort of do what they're doing, but do it better. And, I think there's also evidence, and this is a really interesting topic around the use of embryonic stem cells for regenerative purposes. So, that can get a bit hairy in terms of what your sort of politics and all of that. But I do think that there's some research that shows that there could be regenerative, purposes, uses for embryonic stem cells as well. And then that kind of leads me to the other adjacency, which is, possibly doing something in cell and gene therapy. Again, could we transfer our technology there? So those are some of the, I think, bigger visionary items. I do think this might sound aspirational, but one of the things that we really care about at Tomorrow is not only the mission of safeguarding these, precious cells, but how do we really get to a place where we're helping the overall industry to democratize IVF or fertility services? And that means, the use of technology and innovation to really drive down prices. And I think we can do that. I think we can be part of that. I think it's going to involve a lot of ecosystem players to help push that movement. But I think that when you're looking at 1 in 8 people need some sort of assistance from a physician to have a child, that's a lot. That's verging on talking about demography. And I think at that level of prevalence, making a small impact is going to actually be a huge one. And so if we can somehow, again, use technology and innovation to drive down the prices, drive up access to this kind of care, that's kind of the ultimate aspiration. Yeah.
Love it. And, I personally hope that you become such a big, successful company that the prices are cheap enough, or you have enough like new versions and maybe people need to donate the old versions away. Please send them to academia because, academia, we would have these precious cell lines. I worked in an Alzheimer's lab. We neuron cells, man, you only unthawed those at least twice and then that's it, and then you got to grow more and like refree, like, oh, please donate to academia. We, especially small liberal arts colleges, like I went to an undergrad, like we didn't have all the fancy stuff. And so, donate back.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good idea. We would love to do that, actually. And we are talking to not just fertility clinics, but some of the academic institutions. We're talking to Stanford, Cornell, and others. And look, we just really want to make an impact however we can. And again, kind of going full circle back to the education and awareness piece that we first touched on. I think that any of these areas where we can make an impact, we would like to do. And, the other thing I wanted to tell you about, Brittany, is that, we're very focused on STEM and motivating people to stay in STEM, and women particularly to be motivated to pursue careers in STEM. And I think that, again, working with academia or working with organizations to just share what we're doing and the impact that it can have, I think could be really powerful.
100%. I think that there's a correlation between women getting into STEM and femtech increasing, because women are in STEM, they realize there's this problem, and now we are empowered to be and I'm going to solve it, right? I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to figure it out, even if I don't know how, because I have the scientific method in my head now, so cool. We have two last questions for you that our listeners really love. The first one is, we have a lot of aspiring undergrad and graduate students that want to work in femtech or start a femtech startup. So what's an area in women's health and wellness that still needs innovating?
Oh my goodness. So, well, certainly fertility and reproductive health, I think there's still so much to do there. There's a handful of really interesting companies, but I think, when people talk about fertility, there's the companies that are focused on benefits and working with large companies to increase benefits. I think that's awesome. There's, companies like Tomorrow that are focused on kind of the cryo storage and the specimen management piece. But there's so much more that we could do in terms of fertility education, fertility content, the truth, right? How do we really build that community and resources for people to find out, really valuable information that I just don't think there's enough of right now. So that's one. I think mental health is a big thing, particularly over the last 12 months. But I do think that, when it comes to women and mental health, and particularly different communities within that, I think we do, there is a need for something that's a little bit more tailored to us versus a broad solution for everyone. And there's a lot of work there, I think, that could be really important.
Absolutely. I know there was a statistic that recently came out about the very significant spike in alcohol-related liver disease in women. And they are saying, the first, guesses the scientific community has is that the pandemic has been really freaking stressful on everybody, but in particular women. We have the data on women are losing their jobs more. Women are not going back into the workforce more. Women are taking care of the kids. Women are taking care of their parents, and so they are, assuming that that stress is just leading women to drink beyond normal rates, and it's just spiking. And so 110%, I am believe alcoholism is its own genetic disorder and its own thing, but there is something to be said about what is women's mental health need, right? That we are self-soothing and self-medicating through poison, to get through it. So 100%.
Absolutely.
And then our last question is, what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
Funding. I know I'm a finance-oriented person, so of course that's the first thing I say. But no, I really mean it. There's a lot of statistics out there. About 2% of VC funding last year went to women-led companies, and I'm not even talking about femtech within that. I'm just talking about women-led, women-focused companies. That is too low, way, way, way too low. And I think that there needs to be more attention and more focus on this, because there are so many opportunities to impact half the world's population. And like you said, women are the chief medical officers of their homes, of their lives, of their family, and of their parents and their kids and friends. And I think that you can have the best idea and the best, community and the product and all the things we talked about, but we need people to support those women starting these companies, and that means capital. So I do think that if there are listeners who are, maybe you don't have a great idea to start your own company, but you're in a position where maybe you can work at a fund, or you can work at an investment company, or you can even, help somebody do their Kickstarter or their GoFundMe, right? Like all of these things, it's gonna make, we just have to take one step at a time, Brittany. And like, I think the more money that we can put into the hands of these future entrepreneurs, I think the better.
Yeah. And having worked in private equity, like there's a lot of money in the world, right? Like I grew
A
up
lot of money.
wealthy. I had no comprehension of like money, I guess. And when I got into fundraising for my first startup and people were wiring me in 50K and they were like, it sounds like a good idea. And I'm like, wait, they just have like that much money? Like, and it was kept shocking me. And then I became a venture capitalist and forget it. I learned about family offices and I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of money out here, And so now I'm unapologetically stomping my feet saying, fund us, because I know it's not a school fundraiser from parents who don't have money. It's literally like the money's there, we just have to find the funnels to get over here, right?
There's so much money that if you look at the stats from last year during COVID, private equity and venture capital, there's so much money that people want to put to work, right? And they're looking for ways to invest. And so I think that don't get discouraged, right? And I think to your point about the platforms, one of the things that has impressed me so much about you, Brittany, is that you are in a position where you have a platform, you have this great podcast, and you're opening the door for other women to talk about what they're doing and to share that, because you need that awareness also to drive interest and drive more attention. And I love that you're not just mentoring these people, but you're actually using your platform to give them a voice. And so I think those two things combined is just so powerful. And that's how we're going to change those numbers.
Well, if anyone out there has lots of money and you want to fund me, please. Focus is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are also raising a venture fund, because we know like it's not only the right thing to do, but like if you want to build wealth, like invest in women's health, like invest in tomorrow life sciences, because every lab in the world is using literally archaic liquid nitrogen tanks and needs a robot. So like make your money in women's health, just give it to me, I'll distribute it, and we'll go from there. Right?
Here.
Awesome.
I'll cheers to that.
You are amazing, Melanie. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brittany. It was so great to be here and catch up with you. Thanks again.